everyone. Welcome to Ride IQ. I am so excited today because we have a super special guest. We have Rosie Napravnik here today, and she, for those of you who don't know, is like the best female jockey in history. So she's actually going to share her insights today for the Derby, which is running tomorrow. And I'm super excited to hear her thoughts on it, on all the horses and all the lead up and everything about it. So welcome, Rosie. Thank you for coming. And then on a side note, I'm also super excited to announce that Rosie is actually becoming one of our Ride IQ coaches. So her lessons will be coming up on the app, and she's going to focus a lot on the RRP, which is a huge thing for a lot of people. And she's very experienced with that aspect of it. So welcome. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy, I'm sure, hugely hectic week to do this.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, it's an honor to be asked to be on, and I'm super excited about the Ride IQ lessons. And I think this is a super cool thing. You guys asked me to come on and talk about the Derby, and just a fun way to bridge the gap between race people and sport horse people. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. I think the thing is you have such an insight to it that most of us will never have. And I think just being able to pick your brain and hear your thoughts is super exciting. So what I would like to do is start off, if this is okay with you, why don't you kind of give us, I know your background and I'm sure people do, but give us a little history on you and in the racing world, and then we'll go from there.
So, yeah, I actually grew up eventing, but I became a professional apprentice rider when I was 17. And so when you're an apprentice, you have a weight allowance, but you ride against the journeyman jockey. So you're kind of just thrown to the wolves per se. So I've been riding professionally since I was 17. And I rode for about 9.5 years, which was a relatively short period of time. And then my best years of my career were the last 4 years, which is one of the most wonderful things about my career is that I was able to retire on a real high note. But I won the Kentucky Oaks twice, and I rode in the Kentucky Derby 3 times. So just very, very cool experiences that I'm lucky to be able to share.
That's incredible. So what does a jockey that's riding in the Derby, what is a typical week like for that? Like, I guess it probably depends on the person, but would you say for you, did you have like a normal schedule a week? Did you kind of get wrapped up in the hype? What's that kind of look like?
Yeah, so like going into my first Derby, there are so many events here in Louisville during Derby week, and actually now it hasn't always been this way, but now they have. So you have the Derbies on Saturday, you have the Oakses on Friday. Now they have Thurby, which is Thursday leading up to the Derby. And then last year they had 5-0 Tuesday, which is 502 is the Louisville area code. So it's like the locals day. And now this year we have Werby, which is Wednesday before the Derby. And I mean, they start celebrating Derby here like 2 weeks prior. They have Thunder over Louisville, which is like the first celebration of Derby, which is just like fireworks over the river, the Ohio River. And it's very cool, but they're celebrating up until like forever. But Derby week, it's the only week that we start racing on Tuesday. So the Keeneland meets over on Friday, so they have night racing last Saturday, and then they have they have Sunday, Monday off, and then they start up on Tuesday, which is not normal for really any track. But then they do all these days. So along comes with that lots of benefits. Big fancy black, white tie events to go to that are raising money for various causes. So we're as one of the celebrities of the Derby, you get summoned to all of those, and so it's kind of, and especially in your first Derby, it's really fun to go and kind of play that role and go to all the things and be seen and heard, and meet lots of people and meet lots of the big owners and all the great connections in racing. So that can be really fun. It's also really tiring because it's like, since we're racing since Tuesday, you are riding a full card of races each day and, also sort of working a full day. So it becomes very, very busy. But also, it's like the major horse show hangover at the end. You know how it is leading up to a big horse show. It's the same thing. If you're going to like a Land Rover or something like that, it's like a lot of hype and a lot of busy bustle. And then you have the big show and it's all over. So, but it's, for me, I always was really tried to stay in my normal routine so that I could stay focused, which I'm sure is probably similar to the event riders out there doing the big events. So.
And then, so on the day of the Derby, typically, would you get up and gallop or do anything, or would you keep your day as easy as you could? Would you ride other races on the card?
So probably wouldn't be working on the morning of, just because unless you had a really important horse to work for like another week, another stakes horse or something, you probably wouldn't be working. The tracks, has like abbreviated training hours because they start the races so much earlier because they have so many races on Derby Day. So I think the first post sometimes is like 10:45. So the track's probably only open to like 8 o'clock. So you might have, on a rare occasion, you might have like a really important horse that you have to breeze for another day. But it wouldn't be a busy work day. And then, you got to get to the jockey's room early just because getting in is difficult. And then I would ride a lot of races. I was just that was sort of just for me, that was how it ended up throughout my entire career, is that I rode a lot of races throughout the card. And they have a lot of stake races on Derby Day. So you would try not to ride as many undercard races, but at the same time, if they have a maiden race, it's going to be a really good maiden race, which might have a really good potential horse for later in it. So you end up riding just as many as you normally would. But I almost appreciated that for keeping me in my daily routine. And then of course, during the day, people are coming and asking you for interviews, and so that part of it for me was I just wanted to stay in my routine. So I was happier to keep busy. And then the day does drag out a little bit. They have really, really long periods of time before or between races because they have so many people betting, that they're giving the bettors time to get their bets in, and everyone's of course socializing and drinking and having a merry time. So, it becomes quite a long day, but by the time you get there, the adrenaline kicks in and you're ready to roll for the Derby.
And so, as I'm sure when you rode in the Derby, you were probably the only female jockey in the field at the time. So I know all the male jockeys have their room. Were you by yourself basically for the rest of the day, or?
So that's a good question. And I've actually been asked the question, do you feel like you're in a disadvantage because you're not in the locker room with all the guys all the time? And I'm like, heck no. They would love to have their private room like I have. And we would sometimes have other girls maybe riding some of the undercard races. But I do have I would have my own, there's a separate girls jocks room. It's usually very quiet in there. There's not a lot of other jockeys in there. But on a Derby Day, you have all the jockeys' wives coming through. You have all the jockeys' children coming through, to use the bathroom, and it becomes a little busy. But yeah, so there's at Churchill, it's not always the same, but at Churchill, there's a large common area where there's the kitchen where you would eat, and they have, cook that provides food and stuff. And then they have lounge area where there's TVs, you can watch the races, pool table, that kind of thing. And at Derby time, it's a rather big area. So you get a lot of the family members that come in and spend time up there. But we do have obviously girls room and the guys room. The guys room is much bigger, but it's much more crowded. So I was always extremely privileged to have sort of my own private room wherever I went. And I would always nap a lot. Like I said, it's a long day, so you're napping, but also my body's response to nerves is to go to sleep. So, which I guess I would appreciate, compared to the alternative of being really jittery. So I would really often be found napping and just quiet in the room as much as possible.
And then, so after the Derby wraps, I know, when you go to a big event, a lot of people right off the bat, as soon as that event's over, they're on to the next thing. Some people like to take some downtime and kind of focus. But like for you, did you take a couple days, or were you instantly like, okay, on to the Preakness, on to the Belmont, like how does that work for you?
So, well, luckily after the Derby, there's no racing the next day. That's like your bonus day off.
Nice.
And then, typically you don't race on Mondays and Tuesdays, which we call dark days. So you do have a couple of days off, and then, you'll stay, like, let's say your horse was going to the Preakness. So when I rode Mylute in the Derby in 2013, he finished fifth in the Derby, ran a huge race. And so he went on to the Preakness, but, so they probably aren't going to breeze in between the Derby and the Preakness. If so, like, it would be a very, very, very like mild breeze. So there's not any like real purpose for the jockey to be working with that horse. And obviously they're not going to do much in 2 weeks in between. So I would stay in Kentucky and just, kind of go throughout my day and just fly in for the Preakness. So you really kind of go back into your normal routine up until like the moment you have to be out of town. Because with riding horses every day, multiple horses every day on the race card, every moment that you're not there fulfilling your commitments, you're losing business. So, so you really, you stay at your home track as much as possible, unless you're going out of town to, ride a stake for one of your clients, things like that.
Right. Okay. Interesting. It sounds like a very hectic build-up.
It certainly is.
Okay, so do you want to take a look at, well, you already probably know the current list, but as we were talking before we went live, there's already been some changes. So I'm not sure if I have a current list up or not. So I'm going to let you, if you don't mind, kind of run through the field and give your thoughts on each horse. And then maybe at the end we could think, who are you going to pick?
Yeah, so it's funny because I've been doing the Derby work show in the mornings. So I go out, during training hours and watch all the Derby horses train and sort of comment on how they look, how they, training, how they look on the track, etc. And we were just saying on our last show, which was yesterday morning, how there's been no defections, like no scratches, no rumors of horses scratching, like nothing at all. And then since then, it's completely fallen apart. So, and I'd say that, but there's just quite a few scratches now. So my original picks were, and actually I've erased them now because they scratched. So I got to figure out what order I put them in. But I think it was Forte, and then Practical Move, and then Skinner. And since then, Practical Move and Skinner have both scratched. And then there's also Lord Miles is the 19, and Conator, I think is the name of the Japanese horse, is the 20, have also scratched. So now all three of the also eligible horses have drawn into the field. So you have those 4 scratches, and 2 of them obviously were my picks. So and every time a horse scratches, like, it could completely alter the whole dynamic of the race. Hold on, I'm just trying to work my iPad. Here I am, not a computer person, but a horse person. So I'll start with the horses that I still have in the race on my list. The first one was Forte. And so there's actually rumors about Forte now too. So we'll see if he stays in. There's been rumors about him possibly scratching. You never know what can happen until race day. It's kind of the same if you were entering an event and you were having an issue you were dealing with, you'd stay in until you couldn't stay anymore, right? So trying to do the best by the horse and give him the benefit of the doubt. So when you're handicapping too, like, you've got, when you look at the PPs, you've got the times of the races that they've run in, and then like where, how they ran that race, like where they were in the field. And you also have like speed figures. There's 100 different types of speed figures, and they're just different people calculating them differently. So I actually like to use buyer speed figures. That's what I most use, and that's what the Daily Racing Form uses. And then there's other figures called the Ragozin numbers, and that's just a guy named Ragozin, whose last name's Ragozin, who, does this other formula. So there's all these numbers that you put into place. to come up with how fast the horse has run in a certain race. So I look a lot at those. And then obviously I've gotten the chance to look at the horses in person. But anyway, so Forte has some of the best Beyer numbers, Ragozin numbers, and also has a fantastic resume of winning all of these races. My one knock on him, watching him train, is that he's such a big horse, like a long from head to tail horse, and has such a big stride. A lot of times those horses are a little bit less versatile. Like they have to just be motoring along the whole time, and you can't lose your momentum. And of course, when you're in a field of 20 horses, you might get stopped. You might lose your momentum for a number of reasons. So I was trying to sort of play against the favorite and knock him in that way. But when I watched the replay, I watched his jockey really carefully, and I saw that his jockey never ever hesitated to put him like inside behind horses where you will have that opportunity to get stuck. So he was never scared to put him in that position. So I was like, you know what? This jock's got this confidence in this horse to ride him this way. And I think he's the best horse in the race, like that all the numbers say that he is, all his wins say that he is. And he drew an outside post. So like, let's say he drew the 3 post, then you know you're going to be in a big swarm of horses. But he drew the 15, so he can kind of dictate a little bit of his position. And even if he were to be really wide and lose a lot of ground, I still think he's the best horse, and that might be even the best trip. So I ended up landing on the favorite Forte. Now, of course, like I said, there are rumors that he might end up scratching, so we'll see. I also rode a lot for Todd. I won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile for Todd on Shanghai Bobby in 2012, and I rode a lot for Mike Rapoli as well. I think I rode the Belmont for Mike Rapoli on a filly, and her name was Unlimited Budget. He names a lot of his horses after his wife. So he has horses like Stop Shopping Maria and Unlimited Budget, all related to his wife's shopping habits.
That's awesome.
But anyway, I love the connections there, and always rooting for those guys. Todd is an absolute top class horseman. So that's my top pick. So my next picks were the 2 that scratched, Skinner and Practical Move, who I think both come from California. One's John Sheriffs and one's Tim Yachteen. So I kind of have to completely redo my picks because, so Practical Move was a speed horse. That matters. He was a quick speed horse. The California horses often come with a lot of speed. And then Lord Miles was also one of the other scratches, had, some tactical speed. So I wouldn't say it changes the race as a whole. But another horse that I had on my pick was Rocket Can. So Rocket Can is kind of a price. Let me see what he ends up being morning line. Because everyone, of course, in the Derby, you want to beat the favorite and like have a lot of value in your picks. I just kind of pick the way I think they're going to come in, which I don't necessarily claim to be extremely good at. So Rocket Can is number 18, trained by Bill Mott, another one of the greatest horsemen in the game. He ran in 3 of the fastest Derby prep races leading up to the Derby, and he also has really consistent Ragozin numbers as well as pretty consistent Beyer numbers. He's a horse that I think will have to like move forward as far as get better again. I think he's been getting better, and he was actually, what I think a lot of people overlook about this horse is that he was second to Forte 2 races back, and just kind of gets overlooked for it. They put on, so his last race was one of the fastest Derby preps, but one of his, not one of his best races. But Bill Mott put blinkers on for this race, which a move like that it's kind of a bold move going into the Derby, especially when you have like the big field and the crowd and everything. You kind of don't know how they're going to react to all of that stimuli as well. But usually they're going to put blinkers on for a horse that needs more focus. And I think if that helps move the horse forward, I think he's on a forward trend anyway. And he definitely is a horse that will get the distance. It's always a question, like, does the horse want to go 1.25 miles? Are they going to be able to last in this very, very long race? And it's not just the distance, but Churchill has a particularly long stretch, which you would think that because the distance is the distance that it wouldn't make a difference, but it does make a difference of how long the stretch is. And that's because they run on their left lead around the turns and they run on their right leads down the lane. So if you think about it, they do that to refresh, what lead they're on. And so they're running on their right lead for a longer amount of time and getting tired on that lead. So really long stretch. So anyway, so you want a horse that's, looks like he's really going to get the distance. And I think that's Rocket Can. So I had him picked. And then we'll move up to Verify, who is Brad Cox's horse. Brad's another trainer that I really love. Really good friends with my husband and a great guy. He's got Verifying. This is a horse that's actually going to be one of the speed horses. And you can tell that just by looking at his past performances, like where he prefers to run in the field, how he's run, previously. He's been really forwardly placed. He's usually sitting like second or third. There's not a lot of horses in here that like have to have the lead. King's Barnes will be one. He's another Todd Pletcher entry. But King's Barnes, I liked this horse, but his numbers don't quite suggest he's at the same level as some of the others. And he's really inexperienced to be running in a 20 horse field. So he's only run 3 times. Like that's,
oh wow.
It's like, I guess if you would try to compare that to, you're just stepping up into recognized shows. So anyway, King's Barnes would be a speed horse. Reincarnate would be a speed horse. I probably would have to maybe throw Reincarnate into one of my picks. Like if I was adding someone to it, another horse with speed, which I like, and probably even more speed than Verifying. But I also really liked this horse's Breeze in the Morning, was something that I noticed. And he's got one of the best riders in the country. Johnny Velasquez is one of the most experienced riders probably in the Derby for sure. And in my opinion, he's the best one out there. So very smart jockey and experienced riding the Derby. I think he's crossed the wire first 4 times and officially won the Derby 3 times when they had the DQ years ago. So I'm going to rate him down, Reincarnate. Do you have any questions?
I do have actually a couple if you're ready for one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one question from the audience. Do you wake up on the morning of the Oaks and the Derby? Are you excited or are you regretful?
So I'm a person, I don't have a lot of nerves. Like I'm not a nervy person, so I don't get overly excited. And like I said, I think my body's response to nerves is to go like really like quiet, right. And like low energy. But it is exciting. I don't feel nervous like I don't want to go. Like it's like I hear a lot of people talk about like nightmares on cross country, and I don't ever have that. Even going into like my first Derby, it's more just like I can't wait to have the experience under my belt, so I don't have all these first time questions of like what's this going to be like. But the thing about the like race riding too is I feel like the more prepared I am, the less nervous I am. And one of the things that I got really good at in the last few years of my career is like trip handicapping. So figuring out how the race would set up, what my trip was going to be. But not only my trip, but everybody else's trip too. So it got to the point where I was good at predicting like how things would play out. And when I say that, I mean like plan A, B, C, and D, because, things happen so fast and there's so many horses in the race that, things change in an instant and you just have to have those instinct to be able to adapt to it. But I found like the more that I studied the horses, the jockeys, the more I could sort of let it all play out in my head before it happened. And I ended up getting pretty good at that. And so that gave me so much confidence to ride with. And as you know, as any of us know in probably any sport, the more confidence you have, the more confidence you get, you know, like you just feel like unstoppable. And so that like information to me was so valuable. And like before I would walk out to the paddock to get on my horse in the Derby, because there's a lot of horses in the Derby, there's a lot to, you know, to bring with you just in here. No notes. But I would be like literally looking at the page, looking at the information, the past performances, just kind of repeating things in my head of like what I was expecting until the moment I would walk out.
Wow.
And just staying super, super focused. And then, you know, like I'm shaking hands and I'm there, but I'm really not there. I'm like in my head, just super focused. And then like once you get on the horse, then it's kind of like, okay, now I'm where I am. Now I'm in my back in my comfort zone.
Exactly.
And then, you know, even going into the gate, you know, you get kind of like excited, like ready. And then once the gates open, it's just like, you're just thinking without thinking. So it's just, things happen. It's so fast. It's so cool.
I mean, not quite as fast, but I'm sure going into the start box for cross country is the same. Like, you know,
you're
it's
focused. Yeah.
And then there you are and off you go. And it's all.
Yeah, I mean, like same thing. Like you walk the course multiple times. You have your plan A and your plan B at the question, you know, at the tougher questions, and you have the options. It's the same thing. Like once you go, like, and then you just adapt to whatever happens and however you jump into things. Same thing.
Fortunately, in eventing, though, you aren't dealing with the 19 other horses right around you. What they're
right.
going to
You only have to deal with your own bad choices.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. We have another quick question. Do you think that eventers would benefit more if they galloped racehorses, just as far as developing yourself as an event rider?
Absolutely. And I have heard people that have done so that are actually upper level eventers, which I am not. Okay, I'm still just like here. Obviously, I've done the galloping part, but I'm not one to know the value of it once you get to the higher levels. But I've heard several upper level riders say like 100% it will help every person. But I think like I've been asked to teach galloping clinics, and I think to myself like, there's not much to say, you know, like how am I going to make a whole clinic out of galloping, right? But then when I watch other people do it and I realize, oh, well, like I've just been doing this since the beginning of my time, so it comes very natural. Then I realize, you know, why it is so instrumental that you actually learn how to gallop. And galloping racehorses is like a whole different perspective on like what to do when a horse gets strong, or how to control a horse, how to balance a horse. And, you know, it's how to really let a horse gallop. Like I feel like there are definitely, you know, a lot of people, especially at the lower levels, I think feel like galloping is a faster canter, but it's a completely different gait. And so like being at how, you know, gaining the confidence to let them out into a gallop and then knowing like what that gallop really feels like.
Awesome. Okay, one more question. And this actually ties back into the horses. Can you explain a little bit what are the qualifications for the horses to actually get in the Derby field?
So that has changed over the years. It used to be earnings. So the top 20 money earners would get into the Derby. But I think the issue with that is like you would have some 2-year-olds that would win races like throughout the summer, and you know they would be a good 2-year-old horse and their form doesn't translate at all into a 3-year-old. So Churchill Downs basically decides who gets into the Derby, right? So they had that set, and then they realized they could have, if it was done a different way, they could have different and better horses competing against each other in the Derby. So the field would be better to watch. And more competitive. So they came up with a point system now. And so now like your 2-year-old earnings don't really help you out at all. And I'm not sure if there's no 2-year-old races that have points or just very few of them at the end of the year. But I know like all of the prep races, the 3-year-old prep races, which start like in January, have an assigned amount of points for like first, second, and third. So let's say when you're running in a prep race in January, the winner gets 10 points. But when you're running in a prep race in April, the winner gets 100 points.
Right.
So they're trying to get the best horses at the time in the race. So it is a point system, and I hate to admit that I don't exactly know like how many points and which, but it kind of changes all the time too, so it's hard to keep up with it. And I know like there's also debates against that too. Like for example, in the Kentucky Oaks, there's a filly on the also eligible list who has not drawn into the race for today, who's probably a lot better than some of the horses that are in the race. So, I mean, it's the same. You try to regulate something and you can never come up with every scenario that would arise. So, whichever way you do it, you might not get all the right horses in there. So unless you had like a committee or something, but right now it's a point system.
I would think the earning path would not be good, because I would think there'd be a lot of trainers that would be out there just running the bag out of their horses to earn more money to get in, and maybe not being the best horseman to get there,
Well, I mean, the race purses are so different at that level that if, you couldn't really, I don't know that you could really just run your horse more to get more money. I don't think you would get to that level. So I don't think it's unsafe in that matter. But I can totally see where you're going with that, and you wouldn't want to pressure someone to do that. I mean, I see what their point was with moving away from the earnings into
Right.
the point system. And like I said, you're never going to have anything without what's the word? Flaws.
You're right. There's no perfect way.
No system without flaws.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to the horses running tomorrow.
Okay.
So we kind of have a few of your picks. Who do you think would be the dark horse in the field?
What do you mean by dark horse?
Oh, just like who's the long shot that you think actually, I mean, and maybe you don't, maybe because you've picked your horses, but like I always like to look and go, okay, like they really don't have a good shot, but it'd be amazing if they pulled it off, right?
Okay, so here's a horse, and I'm slightly biased. Number 22, Mandarin Hero, is by Shanghai Bobby, who I won the Breeders' Cup on.
That's really cool.
And he ran a really good buyer figure in the Santa Anita Derby, which is typically, and this year it certainly was one of the fastest Derby prep races. And he lost by a nose to the horse that I did pick, Practical Move. That horse is probably like 15.2 and probably weighs like 950 pounds.
I love it.
He's a pipsqueak.
Oh.
And if you watch the replay of the Santa Anita Derby, and by the way, you can get all those races on YouTube if you just type in like Santa Anita Derby 2023. He is the grittiest little sucker, and he just runs like he's gonna win the Derby in that race. And so I've been waiting for him to draw in, and when you look at him, like you can't give him a shot when you look at him. You're just like, what the heck? And I'm sure, you've all, I mean, like there's the Teddy O'Connors of the world. Not that he didn't look good, but he was just a lot smaller than all the rest. And that's, but horses, I mean, there's horses throughout history and racing. I think Extra Heat is one that comes to mind, who was like a tiny little mare that ran against the boys all the time and, kicked the shit out of everybody. So, he would be like my super wise guy horse is Mandarin Hero.
Okay, I like that one then.
So, and I'm just like slightly partial because I rode the stallion through almost his whole career.
Fair enough.
There's another horse I would point out from watching the training. And that horse is Confidence Game.
Okay.
He's number 4. He's also 20-1. And he's a horse who ran and so this is the dangerous factor with the horses that jump up and run this huge race right before the Derby. Sometimes they do what we call bounce. So they put in this ginormous effort and then they put in a mediocre effort after that. So both of those horses are set up for the bounce factor, but it doesn't always happen. So But this horse, Confidence Game, has looked phenomenal in the morning and had a really, really good breeze. Now, having said that about his last race, it was also in February. So when you get to like that gap in the form, like most of these horses ran at the end of March or the first week in April. So you have 4 to 5 weeks in between races. I think it's 5 weeks from the Bluegrass. I couldn't tell if somebody was entering my house or if my dogs are just tearing it up. So Confidence Game ran at the end of February. So he's like a full month behind. So you have a very fresh horse coming off of a big effort, but then you also have a horse like, is he sharp enough?
Right.
You know, like, I mean, you could also relate that to eventing. Like you plan out your 5-star horse, you plan out those events specifically timed to that particular horse. But I wouldn't say that you would ever plan to have this much time in between races, especially going into the Derby. So, you know, perhaps there was an issue there that they, you know, couldn't run the horse in whatever prep race. I mean, he could have had an abscess or something going into the race, something along those lines. You never know. Or they weren't even planning to go to the Derby, something like that. But anyway, really nice horse. His breeze is actually on the form here in 59 for 5 furlongs, which is a pretty sharp breeze. So that's another kind of long shot. The one horse that I didn't pick, who is going to be one of the favorites, is another Todd Pletcher horse, Tap It Trice. And I don't really dislike anything about this horse. He just ran in one of the slower prep races that doesn't always end up being one of the strongest ones.
Okay.
And then when I say that, like, the best horses don't come out of that race. You know, the ones that end up being the better horses later on didn't come out of that race. And then there's always the horse in the Derby field who isn't going to win the Derby, but it's going to be like a really nice 4-year-old. And for me, that's Disarm. I'm also possibly biased again because these are all the connections I won the Oaks for. And I love Steve and the Windshield group. They're all great. But this horse, Disarm, is sired by Gunrunner, who was 3rd in the Derby. He was kind of that horse who was going to be, and he was a phenomenal 4-year-old and I think 5-year-old too. Yeah. So Disarm, and this horse looks identical to his sire. So he's a horse who I think is moving forward. I don't know that he'll win the Derby, but like he'll be a name that we'll hear about in years, you know, in the next year or two. He'll be a big horse.
Keep an eye on that one. So what is the weather forecast for tomorrow?
Beautiful. Today is Oaks Day and it is 70 and bright sun, and tomorrow is Derby Day and it is 78 and bright sun.
So fast track all the way across the board.
Fast track. The universe is being kind to the horses for a fast track and dry weather, and also being kind to the people who are outside in dresses.
Exactly. So I think we've covered this, but somebody did ask, what is the max number of horses allowed to run in the field?
So it's 20, and which is bigger than any other race. Like I don't think that you can find that anywhere else in this country. Normally the starting gates have 14 slots. So that's typically like the Kentucky Oaks is a 14 horse field. I don't think the 20 horse starting gate would fit across the track in any other place other than the quarter pole chute where they start for the Derby. So they used to have like an auxiliary gate, which was, I guess, 6 spots that attached, it kind of like piggybacked onto the regular 14 horse gate. Sorry, I was just getting the text about the scratch of Skinner, who is just now officially scratched. So we always had this auxiliary gate, and it would be the normal 14 horse gate, and then like a piggyback with 6 more horses. And so then you have a big gap between number 14 and 15. And when you have a gap, what tends to happen is the inside horse breaks out and the outside horse breaks in. And so you lose ground, you lose speed coming out of the gate. Nobody wanted to be in the 14 or the 15 hole. And then also, because of that bigger gap, it left less room for the whole starting gate. And so when you're on the one hole, let me see if I can do this in the camera. When you're on the, I can't do it in the camera, sorry, give up. But when you're in the one hole, you're actually like pointed at the rail.
Okay.
In the turn. So like you're back in the chute and the turn is in front of you. So when you're in the one hole, you're literally starting into the rail and you had to like break and go to the outside. And of course you have 19 other horses coming at you from that side. So it was honestly, it was not the safest way to start the race. But so the 20 horse starting gate that we have now is much more ideal for everybody. But yeah, it's limited to 20. And they do have, now they have, they didn't used to do this, but now they have an also eligible list. So they have, this year there's 3 extra horses, which are also eligible. So they're qualified to run if another horse scratches. So obviously this race has fallen apart in the last 24 hours. There's 4 scratches now. When yesterday morning we were talking about how there's no defections and this is so weird, you know? So when scratches happen late, these extra 3 can draw in so that we still have a full field.
But it sounds like it's possible there might only be 19 then starting tomorrow.
As of now, there is officially 4 scratches, so there will only be 19.
19. Yeah. Okay. I just had a question that I forgot. Okay, so when you rode in the Derby, do you remember what post positions you started from? I'm sure you do because what did you
Yes, my first post position was the most perfect post position. It was 7, which is kind of like, it's in the middle, but a little bit to the inside. So like ground saving, you know, good place to get out of the gate, stuff like that. A good position to get good position. And I also was on a horse that had tactical speed, so it was great. My next one was Mylute, and I believe I was the 6th. I can't remember. I'm mixing it up with the Preakness. I think it was the 6th. Oh, it's on my wall. There it is. That was the 6th.
Okay.
You can see the saddle towel is black and yellow.
Awesome.
So on Mylute, I was 6th. And on him, it didn't really matter as much because he came from way far back. As a matter of fact, that year it was really wet and it was raining. And I was like, how am I going to see? Like with all the dirt and the rain and because when it's wet, like the dirt sticks to your goggles. So I actually asked Edgar Prado, who was riding in the race, I said, how many goggles can you wear? Like, what's the most amount of goggles you've ever worn? And he's like, well, it depends on what it does. If it keeps raining, it'll be really wet and then it will splash off and just be water. But if it stops raining, then it's just going to be really sticky and it's all going to stick to your goggles. So you're going to need a lot more. And I was like, damn. So anyway, I came from last on that, and that was my best finish. And it was the most exciting race because I just was passing horses all the way around the turn. And I was actually following the eventual winner, Orb. I was right behind him. I followed his path. I mean, I obviously didn't know he was going to win. I thought maybe I would win, but I remember turning for home in that race thinking, I bet my husband thinks I could win. I had that conscious thought as I'm flying past horses. I'm like, I bet my family really thinks, I bet they're so excited right now. And there's still so much to do at that point that it's like, you never know. But so that was my second Derby. I was the 6th. And then my last Derby, I was on a pipsqueak. And of course, we drew the 1 hole. And he was also a speed horse. And we got absolutely annihilated and slammed into the rail, and he finished last. His name was Vickers in Trouble, and he was actually a Louisiana bred, and he was tiny little horse. But anyway.
So with the Derby, do they start loading 2 at a time, or because that must be a long wait for the 1 horse, right?
Yeah. So they do a double load. They'll load the 1 and the 11 at the same time. And that way you're as far away from each other, but they 111, 212, 313, so that it takes half the time.
So which do you prefer? Do you like those quiet moments to sit and wait, or do you like being one of the last ones to load where you pretty much are in and you're out?
I'd probably like to be 3rd to last.
Okay.
In the Derby. When you're last in, sometimes, especially when you're loading 20, everyone's kind of in a rush. And so sometimes you might not have as much time to get your horse quite right. So it's a fine line when you're standing in there and waiting of having your horse relaxed, but then getting them ready to stand upright, and, you know, making sure they're putting even weight on all four of their feet, you know, things like that. And you do have a gate hand, you know, an assistant starter that's holding your horse. So like what I would do is I would keep my horse's head cocked, okay, until like the second to last horse would go in. And then as they're putting the last horse in, I would straighten my horse's head. And, you know, your gate hand can kind of shift their weight against your horse so that they'll stand up.
Kind of sharpen them up a little bit.
Yeah, or just to make sure they're like standing even on all four of their feet. And there's always times where, you know, just they're stepping back just as the doors open. That's like a kiss of death, you know, like they just, and it's like an unavoidable thing that happens once in a while, and it's just nothing you can do about it. But yeah, I like to be like in the Derby, I would like to be like third to last, so that you have enough time to get your horse standing upright, but you're not standing in there forever.
And is there any way you can put into words just the emotions and the thoughts as you are in the post parade at the Derby with hundreds of thousands of people there cheering? Like, what goes through your mind? Like, I can't even fathom the feeling that must bring.
So I remember my first Derby, you know, everyone will explain it to you, like what it's like. And everyone says, oh, when they play My Old Kentucky Home, like you'll get really emotional. And I'm not like a very emotional type of person. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, probably not. Like, I'm not from Kentucky, you know, like I don't know that that's going to resonate with me that deep that I would get emotional. But at the same time, if it happens to everybody, like it'll probably happen to me, you know. And it didn't. It wasn't the song for me, but so as the whole grandstand is singing the song, then at the end of the song, there's like this moment of silence, and then the entire crowd, 100,000 plus people, go into this cheering roar. And that for me was like, holy crap, we're here, like we're at the Derby. And just the scene from the racetrack looking up at the grandstand is like, you know, nobody sees that view. Like you haven't seen that view in pictures really. Wow. So that was really like, those were the defining moments for me of like, wow, I'm here, you've made it. Like, you know, try not to mess it up now. And then, you know, just once you go off with the horse, you're with the horse. So it's a little bit more focused, but, and then of course, after you warm up and stuff, then we're all kind of just walking around.
Oh, I think we've lost you, Rosie. Hopefully. Oh, there you are.
Good. And you have me now?
Yep, you're back.
Ramon Dominguez is another one of the greatest jockeys that I've ridden with. And we were walking around kind of just waiting to load, and he looks over at me and he goes, "This is pretty cool, isn't it?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is pretty cool." So definitely, you know, a big honor to be in that post parade and to be on the track for sure.
Do you find in those moments the camaraderie amongst the jockeys is it good? Because, you know, you think of event riders, when you get to Kentucky or like everybody becomes just together kind of. Yes, you're there competing against each other, but it's such a small select group of people that you kind of bond almost. So I would imagine it'd be a little bit the same. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And like in that sense too, like Ramon and I came from the same track. We both came from Maryland. We both started in Maryland. And then we rode together mostly through in Delaware. You know, like he was obviously years ahead of me, and he was a journeyman, and I was a bug rider and coming up. And so it was very, you know, that situation was very much, you know, kind of like sentimental in that way. But also, you know, all the riders kind of, well, I should say most of the riders really get along. And, you know, have that sort of camaraderie too. And it is, you know, you feel like one of the big riders when you're in that group. Yeah, for sure.
Well, you would be one of the big riders in that group.
Yeah.
Are you going to watch in person tomorrow?
No. So we don't have, I would have been there today for the Oaks. We had a horse running in a stake race earlier, except for that I had to ship my horse for a chiropractic appointment. It was a really important, and they couldn't get to me, and I had to go to them, and so like I missed. You can tell where my heart's at now, right?
Exactly, priorities. It's good.
But we don't have any horses running tomorrow. Otherwise, they would be going. We had a horse that was possibly going to run in a race on that day, and then they decided to enter in a race, in a different stake race. So we don't have anything in. So it's kind of, if you don't have anything, it's a really long day, and there's really big crowds, and it's really expensive to get in, and you get to see a lot more from your couch.
I've been to the Derby once, and I agree, it was an experience. But I would it's like a big drunken party watching horses run around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so then just touching on the Oaks, because obviously that is today. Do you have a pick for that?
Okay, hold on. Let me go back to my picks. I think I have a very also uninteresting pick for that because I picked the favorite again.
Okay.
But I tried to play against her again, but like I just think that Wet Paint is the best horse in the race. And I think she got a great post position. She's a closer. And unlike the Derby, in the Oaks, there should be a pretty hot pace. So I think it will play well for a closer. And I just think that she's the best horse in the race. So I went with Wet Paint, who is the favorite.
I like that name.
Another horse, though, a good friend, Brian Hernandez, is riding Defining Purpose, who is a long shot. She's one that's been standing out in the morning. And she's also not very big. She's a cute little gray filly. But she goes around there in the morning with her ears pricked, absolutely loving doing her job. And nice. Also had a really impressive breeze at the track when I was out there on, what day was that? The 29th was cross country day, right? On Saturday?
Yes.
Yeah. So she had a really impressive breeze last Saturday. And she's another one that had like, she won the Ashland, which was one of the faster Oaks preps. But she was a big long shot that day. So it's another one like, is she getting better or is she going to just bounce off of this huge effort that she put in? But Brian Hernandez, Kenny McPeak, they always seem to team up for big races together. So I liked her. And then the other one that I thought was kind of interesting, and I might be slightly biased on this one too, because my husband ran this horse in the sire in the Derby. This horse is by Gervin. It's Dorth Vader is her name.
Dorth.
Dorth Vader.
Okay, yeah, there she is.
She, I think like her number is kind of matched. She's like kind of always right there, but doesn't win all the races. She's just like a really hardworking, hard knocking, might be just a tier below, but always shows up. And she's had like crazy good breezes leading up. So I threw Dorth Vader in there just to make it a little bit interesting because I'm rooting for Gervin. Perfect.
I like that name too. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's funny.
What time is post time for the Oaks today?
Hold on, it might say on here. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to tell you. I have no idea. 5:51. So about an hour.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna watch that. Okay, so to wrap it up, so we pretty much for the Derby, if Forte's in, that was kind of your first pick, right?
Yes.
If he stays in.
That's totally unofficial, off the record. Ride IQ only knows that.
And all the public, you're open to the public right now, by the way.
Well, here we go.
Okay, and I know you liked Verifying. You liked Confidence Game. I'm just trying to Disarm. You like Disarm's the little one, right?
No, Disarm's the one I said might be a really good 4-year-old, but I don't think he's gonna win the Derby. Okay, so who is Mandarin Hero is the little one that I like. Right. Who's by Shanghai Body. I'm totally biased. Okay, no, I'm gonna go with that one. I like that one. I know Kyle's gonna pick the longest shot he can. He'll like that one too then. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us and giving us this insight. It's been really entertaining, like, and interesting, because I've always watched the horses on TV and I read about them in the Blood Horse, but to get
you get to go watch their workouts. That's pretty incredible. Do you ever, just a final that I did want to ask you, do you ever look at the horses and think, eventing, like which one's going to be the best event type there?
Mostly what I think.
That's what we do too. So that's why I'm always curious.
So I think it was last year, the Japanese horse. So they train their horses a little bit differently, and they take them in the chute and they like do dressage with them. Like it's crazy. And I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but their horse, I don't even remember what his name was. He was drool worthy for eventing.
Oh.
And then like, you watch all these big fancy 3-year-olds, and I just think to myself, we get all the racetracks throwbacks, and I'm like, what would happen if we got the good ones? Meanwhile, I say that, and then it's like we get the slow ones because they're built to be slow, which is why they make good event horses, but not good race horses. And that's basically at the forefront of my mind when I'm looking at any horse now is what would it do as an event horse, for sure.
That's like, we'll watch the post parade tomorrow and we're totally all like, oh, that one's got a great walk, or that one's, typically they aren't the ones that go in, but that's the same
exactly.
idea.
Yep.
Well, thank you again, Rosie, so much for taking the time to do this. It's been super entertaining. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it. And
thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
I think Kinsey and Jessa are going to come back on and say